Welcome to Armpit Intellectuals. I am Bilal, currently contemplating the dialectical materialism of my coffee machine.
And I'm Zara, recording from a room that smells like old books and the distinct scent of a laptop fan working overtime. Today, we aren't just scratching the surface. We are performing an autopsy on the soul of South Asian resistance.
We're talking about the three titans who looked at the polite, polished veneer of British India and the early, fragile days of Pakistan and decided to peel back the skin. We're talking about the holy trinity of the progressive writers movement: Saadat Hasan Manto, Ismat Chughtai, and Faiz Ahmad Faiz.
This is a story of three people who were collectively tried for obscenity, jailed for high treason, and eventually expelled from the very movements they helped build. This is about the cost of being a mirror in a society that is terrified of its own reflection.
To understand our trio, we have to talk about the big bang of modern Urdu literature, the 1932 publication of Angare. This wasn't just a book, it was a Molotov cocktail thrown into a library.
Angari was a collection of 9 stories and a play by Sajjad Zahir, Ahmed Ali, Rashid Jahan, and Mahmoud Zafar. It attacked everything: the hypocrisy of the ulama, the decay of the landed gentry, and the sexual repression of the middle class. The British Raj banned it under Section 295A for hurting religious sentiments almost immediately.
But as the historian Aisha Jalal notes, you can't kill an idea by burning the paper. The ban births the Progressive Writers Association in 1936. Their manifesto, drafted in a London restaurant, demanded that literature deal with hunger, social backwardness, and political subjection.
The PWA wanted socialist realism, art that serves the revolution. But our trio took it a step further. They didn't just want to talk about the worker, they wanted to talk about the human, the messy, lustful, broken, and terrified human.
Let's start with the guy who defined armpit intellectualism before we even had a name for it: Saadat Hasan Manto. He was the Progressive Writers Association's favorite poor problem child. If Kafka and Hemingway had a baby in a bar in Bombay, it would be Manto.
Munter's genius was his refusal to moralize. He famously said, "A writer is not a reformer. He is a second rate photographer who captures reality as it is. If you find my work obscene, it is because your society is obscene." Let's look at the 1949 trial of Thanda Gosht in Lahore. This is a story of Ishwar Singh, a man who returns from the partition riots paralyzed by a secret. He tried to rape a girl during a raid, only to realize she was already a corpse.
The prosecution called it filth. Manto's defense was intellectually rigorous. He argued that the story was a study in existential horror. The most famous and devastating quote from the story is when Ishwar Singh confesses to his mistress Kulwant, मैंने उससे कंधे पर लादा और झाड़ियों में ले गया. जब मैंने उससे लिटाया तो वो बिल्कुल ठंडी थी. कसम वाहे गुरु की, वो ठंडा गोश्त था. I carried her on my shoulders and took her into the bushes. When I laid her down, she was stone cold. I swear by my God, she was just cold meat. Manto was showing the literal coldness of the human soul after communal violence. He was tried for obscenity 6 times. He was even tried for Kholdo, a story where a father's joy at his daughter being alive is triggered by her unconscious mechanical response to unzip her trousers when she hears the words, "Open it." a result of being raped so many times.
And the state couldn't handle that level of truth. Manto died at 42, his liver destroyed by cheap booze, leaving an epitaph that challenged God. Here lies Saadat Hasan Manto, and with him lie buried all the secrets and mysteries of the art of short story writing. Under tons of earth he lies, still wondering who among the two is the greater story writer, God or he.
While Manto was documenting the streets, Ismat Chughtai was detonating bombs inside the zanana, the women's quarters.
Ismat was the original bad girl of Urdu letters. She didn't just break the glass ceiling, she threw the glass at patriarchy. Her work is a brilliant application of what Theodore Adorno called bringing chaos into order.
We have to talk about the 1944 Lahore trial for Lihaf, the quilt. The story is told through the eyes of a child watching the swaying of a quilt under which her aunt, Begum Jan, finds relief from her servant, Rabbo, and from a neglectful husband who had eyes for younger men. The genius of Ismat was her linguistic subversion. She used the vocabulary of the household to describe things the state didn't have words for. The prosecution tried to pin her for unnatural sex, but she hadn't used a single explicit word. The quote they hated most was लिहाफ हाथी के मानन दीवार पर झूम रहा था उसके नीचे से दबी दबी चीखों की आवाज़ें आ रही थीं. The quilt was swaying the wall like an elephant. From beneath it, muffled shrieks were emerging.
Ismat sat in court and essentially laughed. She writes in her memoir, Kagazi hai perahan, the paper thin garment. I was told that if I apologized, the case would be dropped. I said, why should I apologize? I haven't committed a theft. Is it a crime to write about what happens in our homes? She won because the judge realized that obscenity was in the mind of the reader, not the text. As scholar Geeta Patel points out, Chughtai was queering the Urdu short story decades before that was even an academic term. She demanded that women be allowed to be human, flawed, sexual, and angry.
Now we move from short fiction to poetry, but not into softness. Faiz Ahmad Faiz is often remembered as the gentle one of the trio, the romantic. The voice recited at protests and weddings alike. But that version of Faiz is a heavily edited cut.
Yes, because Faiz didn't write from a balcony draped in metaphor, he wrote from inside a cell, a prison cell, from the shadow of the gallows, and from the slow realization that the state he believed in might be redeemed was structurally incapable of justice.
In 1951, Faiz was arrested in what became known as the Rawalpindi conspiracy case. Alongside military officers and leftist organizers, he was accused of plotting to overthrow Pakistan's government in a Soviet backed coup. Whether such a coup was even viable is beside the point. What mattered was the message. Dissent would be rebranded as treason.
But Faiz wasn't just any dissenter, he was the editor of Pakistan Times, a trade unionist, a Marxist, and crucially, a poet who understood mass appeal. That combination terrified the state because guns can be controlled, but poems, they travel.
He spent 4 years in prison, much of it in solitary confinement, awaiting possible execution. Instead of retreating into silence, he wrote Zindanama, poems that retooled the classical Urdu ghazal into a language of incarceration, betrayal, and historical grief.
What's radical here is form. Faiz takes the traditional figures of Urdu poetry, the beloved, the tyrant, the knight, the wound, and strips them of abstraction. The beloved becomes the people, and the tyrant becomes the state, and the knight becomes indefinite imprisonment.
Take the line so often quoted but really sat with. यूं ही हमेशा उलझती रही है जुल्म से खल्क ना उनकी रस्म नई है ना अपनी राह नई. This isn't optimism, it's historical materialism in verse. Oppression is not an anomaly, resistance is not a novelty. Both are structural, recurring, exhausting.
And then there's Subh Azadi, the poem that permanently severed Faiz from nationalist romance. While the subcontinent celebrated August 1947 as deliverance, Faiz looked at the rivers of blood, the displaced bodies, the hurried borders, and wrote, Ye daag daag ujala, ye shab gazida seher, wo intizar tha jiska, ye wo seher to nahi. He names independence as incomplete. Actually, worse, he names independence as compromised.
The word Shabe Ghazida matters, night bitten. Freedom emerges injured, already contaminated. Faiz understood that a state born through elite compromise, communal violence, and colonial bureaucracy would reproduce those violences unless radically structured.
This is where Faiz becomes dangerous, not because he rejects the nation, but because he refuses to sanctify it. He loved the people too much to lie to them.
And for that, he paid repeatedly surveillance, arrest, blacklisting, eventually exile. In Beirut, working with Palestinian cultural organizations, connecting South Asian struggles to global anti imperial movements.
This internationalism is often erased from Faiz's history because Faiz wasn't a Pakistani poet in the narrow sense. He was a third worldist, a believer that imperial violence mutates but never disappears, that Lahore and Gaza, Dhaka and Johannesburg are connected by more than just sympathy.
And yet, here's the uncomfortable part. Faiz was later absorbed, canonized, put on stamps sung at state sponsored events. His sharpest critiques softened into vibes.
The same state that jailed him learned how to aestheticize him. And this is the final violence done to radical artists. When their danger is drained and their pain becomes atmosphere, it becomes aesthetics.
Faiz understood this risk. That's why his poetry never offers closure, no final victory, no clean ending. Even love poems carry grief. Even hope is provisional.
And Fez teaches us that poetry isn't a consolation prize. It's not about being consoled, it's documentation. Poetry doesn't save you, but it tells you the truth about why you're drowning.
If Manto exposed the body and Chughtai exposed the home, Faiz exposed the lie at the heart of the post colonial state that freedom without justice is merely a change of management.
What most people forget is that these three weren't just persecuted by the state, they were also attacked by their own peers. In 1949, the Progressive Writers Association held a conference where they essentially excommunicated Manto.
They called him a reactionary and decadent. They wanted him to write about happy workers in factories. Manto wanted to write about the syphilis ridden reality of the marginalized. The progressive became dogmatic.
It's the classic intellectual tragedy. We want a revolution, but only if it fits our specific aesthetic. Manto, Chughtai, and Fez refuse to follow the party line. As Edward Said noted, the true intellectual is in exile, even when they are at home. They were too radical for the conservatives and too honest for the revolutionaries.
As we wrap up this episode, we have to acknowledge the price. We're sitting here in 2026 talking about them as icons. But icons don't bleed. These three did.
Manto died at 42, coughing up blood, convinced he had failed. Chughtai lived through decades of being called shameless. And Faiz lived through the heartbreak of seeing his country collapse into military rule, spending his final years in a cold exile.
There is some romanticism we apply to the persecuted writer, but the reality is much darker. They were the casualties of a society that preferred a clean lie over a messy truth. They didn't choose to be rebels, they simply couldn't breathe in a world of silence.
We might often ask, where are the Mantos and Chughtais of today? But perhaps the real question is, what would we do to them if they were here? Would we report them? Would we cancel them? Would we stay silent when they were dragged to court?
Manto taught us that the writer is a mirror. If you don't like the reflection, don't break the mirror, fix the face.
Today, the mirrors are being broken every day. The state still fears the poet, the moralists still fear the quilt, and the world still fears the pathologist who points out the rot.
Truth is a debt that never gets paid in full. It just gets passed down. And now it's in our hands.
Stay awake and stay uncomfortable.
I'm Bilal.
And I'm Zara. And this was Armpit Intellectuals.